Hi everyone, welcome to episode 3 of the Business and Nature webinar series on From Forest to Oceans, what are the most pioneering nature investments for business? And this is part of the Business and Nature webinar series launched by Salesforce in partnership with ourselves here at Wonderoom to cover the biggest topics for business on nature. We're thrilled to have you all here today, and thanks for entering in your names, where you're coming from, your favorite nature emojis into the chat box. We are going to have a very interactive session today on this really important subject and topic, which is of course coming about 1 week out from COP28. We have a brilliant lineup of panelists joining us today to share their perspective on this. Tom Crowther from the Crowther Lab, Gautier Queru from Mirova Fund, Morikawa from Iberostar, and Whitney Johnston from Salesforce. And just to give you a sense of the flow for today's session, we're going to be starting with moderated, like a brief round of intros from each person, so you can get a sense of each panelist who's joining today and the perspective and the lens they bring to this subject. We'll then be moving into a moderated panel discussion, which I'll lead with the four panelists, probing on different aspects of this question, and really encourage you all to please add in your thoughts into the chat box, any reflections, but for your questions, please add them into the Q&A box that you can see at the bottom, because we'll then come to those in the Q&A discussion, which will be the second half of the session. So feel free just to add those in as anything comes to your mind as we're going through that first moderated section, and then we'll come to those. So now I guess I can quickly introduce myself before passing over to the panel. I'm Mairead Cahill, I'm the founder of Wonderoom, and we work with pioneering businesses and organizations to help create, scale, and communicate nature positive impact through ambitious strategies, partnerships, and multimedia. So with that, over to Tom. If you could kindly introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hi, thanks so much. Yeah, I'm Tom Crowther. I'm an ecologist, so I work in academia studying nature across our planet, and we generate global models of plants, microbes, and animals. Some interesting facts that we've discovered include that we've modeled the most abundant animals on the planet, which are the nematodes, which are 4 out of every 5 animals on the planet. We've also mapped the extent of the wood wide web, the mycorrhizal fungi across the globe, and we showed that our Earth is home to about 3 trillion trees. So there's an animal, microbe, and plant fact for you, just to kick things off.
Thank you so much, Tom. Now over to Gautier.
Hello everyone. Thank you again for the invitation. So my name is Gautier Queru. I'm managing director at Mirova. Mirova is a fund management company, so dedicated to sustainability, but my lens is the one of the financial sector. And actually, I've been working in environmental finance for 19 years now, and on nature especially, and land restoration in particular for 7 years. And really, my contribution to this discussion and to the topic of nature is really to answer the question on how finance can help solve the biodiversity crisis and provide the right tools to fund solutions on the ground. And yeah, happy to share views and exchange with all participants.
Thanks, Gautier. Over to you, Megan.
Hey everyone, I'm Megan Morikawa. I'm Global Director of Sustainability at Iberostar Group, which is a Spanish-based luxury hospitality group with over 100 properties in the Caribbean and Mediterranean. And I'm excited to talk about how business has integrated biodiversity protection as a part of their business case, and looking forward to dive into hopefully a diverse set of ways in which we think this is not only what all coastal and tourism businesses should be doing, but some of the ways in which we've ingrained this into our daily decision-making process within the business. So looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Megan. And Whitney, over to you.
Hello, everyone. So nice to be here with you all today. I'm the Director of Ocean Sustainability at Salesforce. I have a background in chemical oceanography. I studied the impacts of ocean acidification on coral reefs. And now at Salesforce, I'm working to help bring our climate action plan, our nature strategy to life through the lens of ocean action, and really leverage the superpowers of Salesforce in order to deliver on ocean health. And at Salesforce, we do work across trees. Our work for nature spans trees and oceans. And I often find myself contemplating and working on mangroves these days, kind of sitting at the intersection of that tree and ocean work. So excited to share a little bit more with you today on corporate action for nature, and I'm excited for the discussion.
Amazing. So actually, Tom, if we could start with you, obviously there's the new Global Assessment of Forests report that is hot off the press, and you just shared last week ahead of COP28 next week. Really interesting report. Can you share a few of the highlights? Well, firstly, what the report's about, and then a few of the really top line highlights coming from that.
Sure, yeah. So it sounds absurd that I have to spend my life telling people that forests are important and useful, because of course we all fundamentally know that. But in the last 5 or 6 years, there's been a real explosion of our understanding of the scale of these systems. And that has been a wonderful thing. We've shown that forests contribute about a third, they capture about a third of our emissions every year. But unfortunately, that link between forests and climate has actually dragged them into a lot of controversy, because they've also, whilst there's been this explosion of interest in nature, there's also been this explosion of interest in greenwashing. The idea that you can just plant a few trees and ignore the challenges of cutting emissions and ending deforestation within supply chains. And that has been a really dark sort of phase in the nature conversation. And it's actually left nature on really shaky ground when it comes to investments. We're way below the investments that we need to be promoting nature. Now, what this recent assessment is doing is trying to overcome that controversy, because in the literature and in the media, every week there's a new article coming out saying trees will save the world or trees will destroy the world. So this analysis is essentially, it's sort of like an IPCC, but for nature. It shows that it brought together all of the world's ecologists, hundreds of ecologists across the planet, who are working on the global scale state of ecosystems. And it shows that forests, if we can protect and conserve our ecosystems, forests can capture about a third of the excess carbon that's sitting in the atmosphere, as well as capturing a third of our annual emissions each year. This is a vital role in the fight against climate change, but it won't be achieved by mass plantations. It'll be achieved by 61% of it is achieved by protecting the ecosystems that we already have and allowing them to grow to maturity. What many people don't know is that the average forest on our planet is about 30% of its full maturity. They're really degraded because we've cut them all down and messed them all up. Just protecting what we have and allowing them to regrow is a massive contribution to carbon drawdown. And that means trying to end deforestation within our supply chains. The other 39% then comes from restoration. And again, that doesn't mean mass plantations. That means equitable development. That means empowering millions of local communities, farmers, businesses, indigenous populations on the ground who promote well-being for the well-being of, who promote biodiversity for the well-being of people who depend on it. And ultimately, that, I think, was the sort of key take-home message. We cannot be achieving our climate goals without nature, but we also cannot be achieving our nature goals without decarbonizing. Because if we just offset our emissions by planting some trees, our emissions are going to continue to destroy those trees in the long run. We cannot have a choice between emissions cuts and nature. We categorically need both. But as we engage in nature, the strategy has to change. We cannot be doing this with a single tunnel vision on carbon. When we do that, that is what incentivizes these quick mass plantations that quickly capture some carbon in the short term and don't build a healthy ecosystem in the long term, and certainly don't support the livelihoods of people around the world. We need to reframe that focus away from carbon and towards healthy biodiversity and people, because when you achieve those two things, when those are the goals, then you get carbon capture as a byproduct, and that carbon sequestration can be incredibly valuable contribution to climate change as a byproduct, not the primary goal. So I'll leave it.
Yeah, that's fascinating, Tom. And I think, as you say, a couple of, I suppose, the big takeouts for business on that is, firstly, your big emphasis on holistic approach. It's holistic approach. It's widening the aperture beyond an overly carbon-centric view to looking at the full co-benefits around biodiversity and local communities,
And in fact,
of course,
just
also
not
please.
to interrupt, but I'm allergic to the words co-benefits, because for me, the only
they're all
co-benefit
benefits,
is carbon. The real value of nature is
Yeah.
biodiversity and flourishing people and livelihoods, and the co-benefit is carbon.
Yeah, and it's flipping that on its head a bit from what has been the traditional narrative, where it's been primarily coming into the conversation with carbon. I think the other thing that really stood out as well when we think about the audience of businesses is the fact that actually it is deep reductions on emissions alongside any nature-based investments, and that message really being strongly emphasized, I think. And then thirdly, the fact that actually the supply chain deforestation link, that actually every business can be looking within its supply chain to see where, if any, and removing any deforestation aspects of that, alongside looking at broader, nature-based investments that they may be looking to make. I think those are a few things that stood out. Picking up on your point on the sort of the local community, obviously the known importance that we know around the local communities and Indigenous peoples and farmers who are very much at the forefront and stewards of the work that's happening. Any initial, and we can dive into this more later, but any initial reflections or on recommendations actually for business on how to get that piece right when looking at nature investments?
Yeah, absolutely. I think again, the last 5 years have been this explosion of interest, and that's a good thing. We want lots of interest in promoting carbon sequestration in nature. But as with any massive global scale initiative, there's some teething. And I think at the beginning, we've not been achieving. There's potentially we've been doing more harm than good in the early years of this explosion of carbon markets. And I think some of the challenges have been, first, the goal is wrong. If the goal is carbon, you might mess up biodiversity and people. But if the goal is right, then you'll get carbon. The second is, as you said, the idea of offsets. If you're just using it as an excuse to continue doing other damage, that damage will have implications for the trees you put in the ground anyway. So that won't work. But I think for me, the biggest one is everyone I ever speak to wants to get loads of carbon by investing in a big project. And a big project is usually either a greenwashing project managed by someone else, claiming some land and buying it up and planting the trees, or even if it's a good one, it's still one massive WWF funded project that's already doing really well. It's already got all the evidence that it needs, all the monitoring. It's got all the verification that it needs. It can pay 160 grand a year for their reporting. This is not global restoration. Global restoration means distributing those investments across massive portfolios of thousands of little projects, local community-driven projects. When the projects are driven by the people who live there, it will never be greenwashing. No one greenwashes their back garden. It's only when that project is being run by someone else somewhere else that it has the risk of those greenwashing. Whereas instead, if you can be finding thousands of local portfolios of projects, back gardens, community projects, indigenous projects, but farmers, these are the ways that those investments can be spread. You can manage risks. I know that the financial world certainly knows about that, and the nature world has the same thing. But we also will then be sending the money in the right direction. We need the flow of wealth towards these local community-driven projects. And it's for that reason we've the scientists that collaborated on that study have all been collaborating on an organization called Restore, which is just a not-for-profit organization that just shows transparently hundreds of thousands of local projects, local farmers, local conservation efforts around the world. And you can go on there for free. It's called restor.eco, no E. And you can just explore hundreds of thousands of projects if you'd like, and you can see which ones look good and you can see which ones don't look good. And it's that transparency and portfolio building that we really want to move people in the direction of, rather than funding 10 massive, well-funded projects that may or may not be doing good for the world.
Building on that then, I guess, coming to finance next, Gautier, I'm going to turn to you and ask, obviously you've had a very long track record in seeing how this space has evolved through sustainable finance, and then with a much greater focus and lens on nature in recent years, and pioneered a number of funds working in this space. And you mentioned a few of the companies involved already. What are your top line opening reflections, Gautier, on what you're seeing at the moment in terms of company interest in nature investing and how they're thinking about the business case? Because you mentioned value chains, financing within and beyond value chains as a big part of your premise. So perhaps you could give us some insight on how you're coming at this and how businesses' mindsets currently are that you're working with.
Sure. Yeah. And I just also can confirm what Tom said, that it's not only carbon and it's just the other way around. And the co-benefits are basically the primary benefits sometimes. But I think overall, we see at Mirova our mission to contribute to indeed protecting and restoring nature and generating impact in general with a holistic approach. But of course, taking into account the market trends and you know, to surf on the waves. And definitely, net zero carbon has been a pretty powerful wave over the past years that has created a momentum. And at some point, we have allocated capital to support companies meet their net zero targets. But what is very encouraging is that in the wake of net zero commitments, we also see a lot of nature positive commitments coming in. And so overall, for companies, whether it is related to net zero or nature positive, it's about reducing the impact and even having a positive contribution within the value chain, as you just said, and where it's not possible or enough, and I'm not speaking of compensation, but more you're contributing to an overall objective, having also beyond value chain actions. And so we have tried and developed tools to help these two efforts made by companies. And so on the one hand, we are providing long-term funding to projects within the value chains, especially for food and fiber production. And this is, for example, what we've done with the Land Degradation Neutrality Fund that provides CapEx funding to land operators to contribute to sustainable production of cocoa, coffee, wood, tree nuts, and other types of production that would restore land, prevent deforestation, degradation, and ensure sustainable sources for international or national value chains. This is done mostly with more traditional financial investments, be it private but also public investments, and corporates play a role more as I would say an off-taker, as a partner to the project to provide visibility for the demand, but are not investors in the first place. Or we can leverage their efforts with additional funding from institutional investors. And on the other hand, we see in the beyond value chain efforts, direct contributions from the corporates, and where we can also manage and allocate these contribution in mostly to date what are mostly carbon funds. We provide funding to projects on the ground, ultimately to deliver carbon credits, but where our focus is more holistic, and we are supporting sustainable projects on the ground with not only co-benefit, but full objective of protecting and restoring nature, and definitely also including the local communities. And the challenge is more to find the right compromise between the best practices in terms of land or nature management, where local communities are the best place to know what is important, but also good practices in terms of managing and allocating capital efficiently. And often we see a good combination between a local operator or NGO and an international project developer that could play the role as an interface with funders and local operators. But overall, what is great is that with net zero and now nature positive investment, we see more and more attention, capital, and as a result, a sector being built to better allocate capital and resources to the theme. And pretty interesting moment to live and to contribute to a new narrative around nature.
And Gautier, picking up on that, as you mentioned, the entry point or initial motivator for many companies has initially been around supporting net zero targets and often working on that within investments within the value chain. But if you had to look at what's happening in the space now, what would be your prediction for where the nature investing space is going in the next few years in terms of levels of private financing and in terms of number of companies engaged, and perhaps even a slightly greater emphasis perhaps on biodiversity and community benefits? What would be your prediction around that?
I see actually that there have been especially this was accelerated by COP15 and the adoption of the Global Biodiversity Framework. There are a lot of commitments and even concrete actions now happening from different players, be they public or private. But I think going forward, we will probably see more synergies between corporates, private finance, public finance, and to leverage, the efforts of each other and maximize the outcome. And I think this coordination, and that's, I think, these types of webinars and discussions helps really connect the dots, because it's really by joining forces, creating coalitions, and leveraging the respective efforts of each party, and also civil society, obviously, that we can find scalable and while also with a solution with strong integrity. And I think the future is about even more coordination, cooperation, and synergies to maximize the respective efforts of each players.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know that's one that others will be building on as well. Over to you, Megan, to share perhaps interesting to reflect on your big focus on coastal ecosystems at Iberostar. Perhaps you could share more about that, and also about how that really deeply connects in to your overall business strategy and your overall nature positive strategy.
Would be happy to do so. I want to also bring a perspective of a little bit of where I had come from. So I was actually doing a PhD in coral reef restoration when I met the owner of this company, who was very passionate about bringing an ocean focus to the business. It makes sense. We have mostly beachfront properties. The family-owned business is from an island in Mallorca, and the beach and the ocean is our product. And so I joined the company about 5 years ago, where we really accelerated a sustainability strategy that brought us to these business cases that I mentioned today. I want to note too that it was a very, very interesting partnership, because in my PhD, I was making predictions on how we could help restore coral reefs that were more resilient to climate change. Saw a reef bleach before my eyes during the PhD, moved to the private sector, and saw that the amount of influence and capacity and accelerated resources was completely different than what I was able to achieve in a more traditional timescale. So I think there's something really important for us to unlock on how businesses can accelerate solutions when guided through these really important collaborations and science-based strategy, and a lot of really asking for a lot of feedback, right? So what we began in 2018 was what we called our Wave of Change movement, which started with a focus just on plastics, on seafood, and on coral reefs. And I think that's an important start of our beginning, which was that we didn't enter into the most complex space in the beginning. We started with baby steps that made a lot of sense for the business, but had really ambitious timelines for that work. So we removed all of our single-use plastics across the entire global operations in 18 months. And that was whetting our appetite for, wow, we really need to do more. And fast forward, now we have a focus area that looks at climate action, at circular economy, at nature-based solutions, which is where a lot of our biodiversity work falls into play. Blue foods, because we get really passionate about seafood as well, and the intersection between tourism and seafood, and then also destination stewardship. And I want to bring this back to the business case, right? Because businesses do this risk analysis every year to understand what are the global geopolitical risks that the businesses face. And ever since we began our risk assessments, our top leaders within the organization identified exposure to extreme weather events and climate change as the #1 risk. This is above geopolitical instability, above pandemics, right? And that's because we're experiencing loss of beaches, we're experiencing closure of our properties from hurricanes, we're experiencing sargassum blooms, right? And so the impacts of climate change is something that is really, really tangible for the business. But one of the really important lessons that we learned was it's difficult to turn all of that existential crisis into action, right? Within what that business can actually focus on. So a lot of the work that we've done in the last 5 years has been to develop roadmaps across those 5 focus areas that help make it make sense in the timelines that are relevant for businesses to take more efficient decisions. This meant getting really important, ambitious long-term targets. We've got one to have the entire business carbon neutral by 2030, but those 8-year timescales are really difficult for a business to digest. So we needed to break that down into year-over-year achievements and quarterly achievements for the business to make that turn into action. It also required a lot of empowering departments to be able to change behaviors and practices, unlocking investments that the company hasn't had before. But we built out these roadmaps, which you can find on our Wave of Change website, that focus on a couple of different areas in the biodiversity and nature space. The first is in climate mitigation, right? So we've got a super ambitious decarbonization roadmap to remove our sources of emissions from both our direct emissions and our value chain as much as possible, because you have to decarbonize first before thinking about any nature-based compensation and mitigation. But we also have a very comprehensive program on protecting and restoring nature within our destinations to reach up to 500,000 metric tons or 22,000 hectares roughly of nature-based compensation, and can dive into a little bit more detail around our nature-based compensation program, since this is a really strong intersection with a lot of the speakers here. We also have a focus on the quality of the product, right? So these 5 business cases we outline in our coastal health roadmap, which you can also find, and we launched last year at the UN Ocean Conference, to kind of identify these pathways that we're integrating all the way down into what are the externalities that we're assuming so that there are return on the benefits, right? Return over the long run. Can we reduce our insurance premiums by focusing on risk mitigation? So we do a lot of work on protecting and restoring coastal ecosystems like the coral reefs or the seagrasses or the mangroves that help to provide some of that protection services, right? We also have business cases that focus in a kind of more urban setting, like green plot ratios. There's really great evidence that showcases if you've got a lot of greenery in your built environment, there's health and well-being benefits for your employees and your clients. So we've got targets around our green plot ratios that also integrate native species, switching to native species, which also give us bottom lines of reducing our water consumption. So a lot of kind of focus and work in that space. And then a biodiversity lens within destination stewardship that also is one of the spaces where we do that work. I'm happy to dive into a lot of this more deeply, but I think what the focus is there's a lot of reasons why businesses can integrate this if they're able to get it down into business-based decisions.
Yeah. And as you say, a lot of it is making that very strong connection, if it is coming from business, around the overall, how it connects to their business, their strategy, superpowers, places in which they're present. And I think one of the things when we spoke, Megan, that really struck me about how Iberostar is implementing your strategy on coastal ecosystems is actually the incredibly local approach that you're taking. So you're not necessarily going through large projects, but you are actually taking this very local based approach in order to engage and deliver and support local communities and growth of local talent. Do you want to just share a quick reflection on why you chose that approach? Because not every business obviously does that.
Well, travel and tourism is definitely very location based, and we've had a lot of challenges in the past of thinking about things like economic leakage, right? So I think those lessons learned in where finance goes from the tourism business helped us to think really deeply about, well, we need to make sure that any of the investment that we do goes back to the communities and back to the biodiversity that's providing the ecosystem services that also help prolong our ability to do business in these locations. So across everything we do, you know, our 30,000 employees are from the places in which we're operating. It becomes an employee engagement lever as well, in terms of why it is that it's so important for us to focus on programs and projects that additionally benefit the places in which we're operating. It makes it a lot more challenging because there are definitely some very clear logistical challenges to some of Tom's comments on having lots and lots of small scale projects and small scale investments. And so we're trying to hit that intermediate point, right, to figure out how it is that we can find the business case for the financial scale within that. But certainly the destination stewardship focus is a core part of how we make sure tourism can be a force for good.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Megan. Whitney, over to you actually to share a little bit more about Salesforce's approach in this space, and particularly I think mangrove breakthrough is something that would be really exciting to hear your thoughts on and reflections.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'll start with kind of some framing, picking up on some of what Gautier shared and kind of touched on, which is like what's top of mind for us at Salesforce right now. We're really thinking a lot about collaboration and cooperation, and really thinking, okay, so as we're trying to participate in this nature positive movement, how do we participate in a constructive way with so many other players, because this movement really is, it's not a unilateral, you can't make a unilateral play in order to become nature positive. You really need to be working with, as part of this broader system. In fact, as part of an ecosystem of players. So in fact, we might want to take a page out of the, natural sciences book and think about the complexity of ecosystems and really what makes an ecosystem thrive. We're talking about biodiversity today. The answer is right under our nose. Looking at the shape and what makes an ecosystem biodiverse, it's that complexity, as well as all of those different players within an ecosystem participating in an interoperable way. So that brings me back then to collaboration and cooperation. How can we almost mimic a complex ecosystem that is biodiverse, and that biodiversity helps it thrive and deliver even more rich ecosystem services? And how can we mimic that? And so that's where I think about the cooperation and the opportunity. When we reimagine our relationship with nature and our relationship with each other, so many new possibilities open up. And this is what brings me then to the mangrove breakthrough. This is why I think the mangrove breakthrough is really exciting. So I'm going to take a beat and explain what is the mangrove breakthrough. So this is a breakthrough that was launched by the Global Mangrove Alliance and the Climate Champions last COP, so in Sharm el-Sheikh. And it is a science-based goal. The Global Mangrove Alliance is an alliance of some of the leading experts on mangrove science. And they worked through the literature and developed a science-based goal to halt loss, restore half of restorable mangroves on the planet, double protection, and sustainably finance mangroves. And they determined that that would all sum up to a 15 million hectare goal and would require about a $4 billion investment. Now, how do you mobilize $4 billion to secure the future of mangroves? Well, they worked over the past year then to develop a finance roadmap, a financial roadmap that really articulates and breaks down, how you can build out a diverse set of financial tools and instruments in order to reach this goal. And what's so beautiful about this is that you land back at the solution, like I said, that's kind of right under our nose, that it's a diverse strategy. It's a strategy that brings in so many different players that is going to kind of deliver that solution. And so what you'll see if you take a look at that roadmap, I think we'll share it at some point, is you'll see opportunities for philanthropy, opportunities for blended finance, for equity. Oh, sorry about that. For equity and debt, microloans, insurance, blue bonds, debt for nature swaps, a whole toolkit of financial instruments that can be brought together. And what I think is also exciting about this financial roadmap is that it also provides then entry points for everyone who's on this call, everyone who's participating in the nature positive movement, to really tap into their own superpowers and contribute to a systems play, into an initiative that's taking a systems-based view at solving for mangrove ecosystem health globally. So that's what's top of mind for us today. It's new possibilities and that are open by collaboration and cooperation.
Amazing. Whitney, can you share a few things though also on discoverability? Because I think that's something that we've also touched on together around how businesses actually discover quality investments, nature investments within potentially, even beyond mangrove breakthrough, obviously, just in general, because this is a space that Salesforce has engaged a lot in, both in terms of trees, oceans, and beyond.
Yes, absolutely. So we asked ourselves this question at the beginning of last year. We were thinking, wow, this mangrove breakthrough, really exciting. We'd love to make more investments in mangroves as part of our commitment to OneT.org. So we have a commitment to restore, grow, and conserve 100 million trees as founding members of OneT.org. We then set out, okay, well, how can we apply that commitment then to helping implement, shovel-ready projects on the ground. And we really needed to open the aperture and understand, well, who are the players? How do we get beyond the usual suspects? I think, Tom, you were touching on this. Like, how do we really participate in a really inclusive movement and get money down to the ground, to the communities who are innovating and who have that immediate relationship with that ecosystem, and help ensure that they're supported in realizing their vision for their relationship with their mangrove ecosystems. So we issued an RFP, and we leaned on the mangrove breakthrough principles, in fact. So we had partnered, in fact, with several leading NGOs and nonprofits to develop high quality blue carbon principles and guidance, which we released in Sharm el Sheikh. And those then helped inform then the mangrove breakthrough principles, which you can find on their website. And we use those principles to develop an RFP process that was really anchored in science and anchored in safeguarding nature, empowering people, and taking a locally based orientation to your project design, and mobilizing high integrity capital. So that kind of served as a lighthouse, or a roadmap, really, for our search for high quality projects. And what was interesting, what we found is, and we didn't know what we would find. We didn't know if we would find a lot of mass plantations of monoculture plantations, or if we could find, what's called community-based ecological mangrove restoration. And what we found, in fact, was far more projects, high quality projects, that we could find with the resources that we had. We discovered 71 projects with only 4 weeks open for the RFP. 71 projects came across our desk, and about 20 of those projects were we felt were ready for investment. And the other projects we didn't feel were, it's not about high quality, low quality per se, but it was, those projects were really opportunities for those funders who can serve in that capacity building role. So they might have been really strong projects, but maybe there's an opportunity for more community leadership, for example, or for more thoughtfulness around and attention to sustainable livelihoods. So there were some key areas where there could be a little bit more capacity building. And so that's where I think also where we can differentiate our roles in our kind of financial contributions to this overall ecosystem. Some players are going to be wanting to bring dollars to the table that are for capacity building and that can help ensure that projects are ecologically based. Whereas other players are going to bring dollars to the table that are ready for implementation and want to fund implementation projects. And then others might be able to bring finance to the table that can finance new business models. And so I think when we can sequence that, and we can also work in collaboration with one another, I think we can see some success. But yeah, that's what we discovered through our RFP. And we're also happy to share. We're happy to talk with individuals one-on-one and share, individual projects according to your financing goals.
Super helpful, Whitney. I think the emphasis again on that idea of coordination and collaboration and leveraging different strengths in terms of different forms of finance is obviously really, really important. And it's interesting because I think hearing Whitney, you speak, and Megan, you speak, both coming from corporates who are in different sectors, both relatively asset light sectors as well, both with a strong focus on coastal. And then quite different approaches to realizing that goal. And it shows you can get there in different ways. So, from something like the Mangrove Breakthrough, which is a $4 billion ambition with tons of partners and global in nature, through to Megan, your approach working at the sort of very local level in terms of surfacing these opportunities and local partnerships. I think that's quite interesting. And perhaps for people on the call and on the webinar, they feel like, well, actually, there's different routes in here. There is not a one way or one size fits all, but there certainly are design principles for success. And I think that's what all 4 of you have been speaking to in different ways. Can we touch on, we have got some really good questions coming in the Q&A box, which I've already read through, and we'll be weaving into the discussion here. And please add more in, everyone on the webinar. But can we touch on biodiversity credits? Someone also touched on this a little bit in one of the questions. over to you. This is obviously, we know this is a bit of a hot button question. What do you think of biodiversity credits? It's a very open question, but can we, Tom and then Gautier, can we have a couple of reflections quickly from each of you on that?
Great. Yeah, absolutely. I think biodiversity credits is an exploding idea, and everybody's increasingly interested in it because of the concerns I mentioned at the beginning. You know, this tunnel vision on carbon has been a distraction from the things that really matter. My worry is that biodiversity credits will do the same thing. If we depending on how we categorize biodiversity, we could cause as much harm as good. If we define biodiversity as the number of frog species, or the number of ponds, or the number of however you measure biodiversity, you're going to be doing an oversimplification of what the holistic structure is. So I think that's one thing that we categorically must step away from. You know, that all the damage we've ever done to our planet ultimately stems from our utilitarian use of the world's resources. Nature provides everything we need. We extract the bits we like and we propagate them at scale so that we have food and medicines and the things we need. Now climate change comes along and we're extracting the carbon bit and we're propagating that. And the danger is we're now going to extract the measurable bit of biodiversity and propagate that. And that will be causing the same. I can see the same concerns about biodiversity credits in 10 years' time as we have around other nature-based markets. However, I do believe that we definitely have the analytical ability now to, instead of measuring one part of biodiversity, we can measure the holistic structure of biodiversity. I know one initiative, which again, hundreds of academic groups around the world, it's called SEED, SEED, which essentially measures the biocomplexity of every pixel on the planet for free, so that you can measure how close the complexity of any region of biodiversity is to its natural state, which is quite useful. I think the other big, so my first concern about it is make sure we're not oversimplifying biodiversity. Make sure whatever we use to measure it is representing the complexity of the system. The other concern I've got is a little bit more of a philosophical one. I'm not quite sure where I sit on it. As an ecologist, I'm probably not the best to speak on this topic, but I think what we tend to see is inequitable distribution of wealth on the planet drives degradation. It's people who live in short-term financial cycles that need to exploit their local resources so that they can survive. And because the wealth is all owned somewhere, the wealth of that land is owned somewhere else in towers in cities. It's that inequitable distribution of wealth that sort of drives a lot of degradation. And if we're going to be building biodiversity credits that, where a rich person can buy a credit from the person on the ground, but then that rich person can then go and sell it off many times over and make much more money, we might be in the danger of driving further that inequitable distribution of wealth. We can't make the same mistakes that our existing market systems have often done. And I know that there's brilliant people working on this to make sure that that doesn't happen, to make sure that the flow of wealth goes in the other direction, because that's what this is all about. It's about driving the flow of wealth on our planet towards the millions of local stewards of biodiversity across the globe. And if biodiversity markets can do that by holistically valuing the entire complexity of nature and by distributing wealth towards the stewards of nature, then I'm in. But that's a lot of ifs, and I think it's a tricky one to tread. Yeah,
absolutely. Given they are happening though, and that train has kind of left the station, what's the opportunity, Gautier, for us to get this right from the financial side and to flow it in the right direction?
I mean, I really agree with what Tom said. I mean, at some point, rewarding the stewardship or the positive or the players that are doing good things on the ground, and if it goes through biodiversity credits, that's in principle a good idea, and it's a way to address market inefficiency and market failures, and namely by internalizing positive externalities and paying those that are doing good for nature. But there should be some safeguards for this to scale up, and actually the integrity required should be both on the supply side, so on the quality of the standards and of the way to measure and reward project, but also on the demand side, the way such biodiversity credits will be used. And I think it's true for carbon, and it's even more true for biodiversity credit. We need to ensure this dual integrity on a good project, but for good use. The objective is not for biodiversity credits to enable market players to destroy more nature elsewhere, but more to contribute to a nature positive world and to align any trajectory with this overall objective. And that's where we can learn from the carbon markets and apply faster, I would say, the good governance and principle that now are coming from initiatives such as VCMI, ICVCM under the carbon market to be immediately applied to this nascent biodiversity credits market.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gautier. And picking up on a couple more of the questions in the Q&A box. So given time, we'll make sure we answer these in a hopefully punchy and valuable way. I think there's a couple I'd love just to address quickly, which is one is by Tim, who asks, how does a business decide what it needs to do to become nature positive? I mean, firstly, I think my perspective on this is that a business can't become nature positive. A business can't be nature positive in that sense. It can contribute towards a nature positive future through the work that it does, and that's an important distinction actually with net zero and some of the broader climate goals. And of course, those two strategies need to be interconnected anyway. The other one was from Will around how can we provide some advice on how to make the business case to convince clients to invest into conservation and sustainability. So what can be the compelling driver to get business to invest? I think a few we've touched on already, and I'll ask the panel to add any additional builds. I think some are connecting it back to the business and therefore showing and demonstrating the link to building business resilience. And obviously within that, strong connections through to value chain and supply chain. And then also the connections through to where you're based as a business, engaging your customers, engaging your employees, that links to acquisition and retention of talent ultimately as well, and customers. Are there, and then obviously broadly achieving net zero and nature positive goals. Any others that the panel would like to add to? We'll have to keep it short because of time, so I'll do a go round. Whitney, you've got something to
I do, because we've talked so much about collaboration and coordination, but we don't often talk about how do you do that well. And I think I love this question because I actually would rephrase it. I don't know if we really need to convince others. I think we'll be more successful because convincing is really, it's a paradigm about having two people on opposite sides of the table and you're trying to convince someone of your point of view. But I think if we move everyone to the same side of the table and we look at the problem we're trying to solve together, then that's when we're truly collaborating. And so I think that it's really kind of hard to like sit down and convince customers to do something, but rather instead it's an invitation to collaborate on shared goals. And it starts with understanding. So we want to start with listening and understanding what is important to them and what are their values and what are they trying to accomplish. And then how can we align that then with what we're trying to accomplish? And that's when the collaboration happens. And that's when I think the new possibilities open up. So I definitely wanted to share a couple of perspectives on that.
I'd love to emphasize that point too, which I think it is really important to recognize it's difficult to convince a business to do anything. Typically, we do that through regulation, right, and reporting, and those sticks they tend to be very slow. They need to be there. It absolutely needs to be there. But in terms of what accelerates the best part of the private sector, which it can mobilize capital and implement solutions very quickly if those solutions are guided really well, I think you do need to find that way to understand what the values are of that business so that you can find the best way that business can provide a unique contribution. So I think if any of you are trying to figure out how to start your steps within your own business context, it really has to do with what your leadership might know. Whitney too also has leadership that's very, very passionate about the topics. It's really difficult to get any capital or changes within your organization if your leadership is also not bought into this. And so if it's something that you're trying to convince your organization to do from the inside, it's going to be very difficult. But if you take the perspective of how do I find the bright spots of what this business can do best and how that fits with nature and fan those bright spots until we're able to embrace the complexity, because there's so much new content that you have to learn in order to do this well. And every step of the way, there's something that you are doing that could be improved, right? So it's really difficult for businesses to figure out how to do this. And I think what's most important is figure out the way that it best fits within your business values so that you can accelerate this movement within the context of your business environment.
Excellent. We've got, COP28 next week. And it would just be interesting to hear each of you share a top line key message, a takeaway that you hope business hears right now when thinking about pioneering nature investments. Tom, over to you, and we can go around then to Megan, Gautier, and Whitney.
All right, great. I guess my top line takeaway is that simple fact that we cannot achieve our climate goals without nature, and we cannot achieve our nature goals without climate action. We categorically need both. There can no longer be any choice between the two. And I guess I just want to put out a thing to think about, a question to think about, that if we do agree with what I mentioned earlier about, if we're trying to distribute the wealth of our planet to the stewards of nature, something that I think about a lot and that I don't have the answer to is, when I first started speaking to organizations and corporates to promote investments into nature, I was thinking, yeah, you can invest, you can get a return, and that can be beneficial for your company and for the organization. But the more deeply I think about it, the more I think that return, it's sort of, I don't know. I feel like we still need to be sending more than we're getting back, and I'm not quite sure where I land on that. So I'd love to hear anybody else's opinion on that.
Megan, over to you.
I'd say coming into COP28, my biggest message might be don't let perfect be the enemy of progress. And one of the main themes we had from COP to COP is we got to move from commitments to action. I understand why it's really frightening to do so, because commitments at least give you a sense of where to go, but the action's really hard to be able to implement, particularly when there's a lot of critique on how to do that exactly the right way, because there is no right way, because there's a lot of different opinions of how to navigate this complex value driven space. So don't let perfect be the enemy of progress. There's a lot of really great resources that are already existing out there to help you start on the journey. And I think there's a lot of steps you can take within your own businesses to try and iterate and find what sticks. And the more you get that within the mainstream line of what that business is doing as a part of its core, the more you'll be able to accelerate that action and learn by gaining feedback from peers in the space.
Gautier?
Yeah, I was about to say some similar things, so happy to see that it resonates well with other contributors. But indeed, over the past years, we have moved from awareness to commitment, and from commitment to action, and probably action is the most difficult part, because it requires a lot of efforts. And just to also reiterate on what I said before, I think many players are making this effort, but if we combine the effort by joining forces and working in coalition, then this can happen. And I think it's really a matter of combining the efforts the right way, and coalitions of the willing are probably the best approach between public, private, civil society players.
Great. And I'll share, I think it's important that we always remind ourselves to move away from an either or mentality to a yes and mentality. So it's not either decarbonize or invest in nature, but it's yes, we need to decarbonize deeply and invest in nature. And that can apply to so many other paradigms. So I think when we can do that, again, we can unlock more possibilities. And if you're not sure where to start, as Gautier was saying, plugging into coalitions is where you can start, because then you can learn from others. And a couple of those would be OneT.org is a great place to work with other corporate players and learn from others and identify new opportunities to invest. And then also the Mangrove Breakthrough, as I said, now the financial roadmap essentially offers a menu of options in terms of where to plug in and where to unlock your superpowers for mangrove health and for nature. So I'll leave it at that. And yeah, lovely to share with you all. Brilliant.
And I think we're going to bring up just a couple of closing slides with some of those resources in a minute. But I think if I'd say 5 points then that summarize what we've heard and discussed, it's climate and nature action combined. One is the other and the other is the one. So you have to look at both together. The second is progress over perfection. Third is taking a very holistic and local community-led approach that really deeply values and supports local communities and Indigenous peoples and farmers and stewards of nature on the ground. Fourth is really smart partnerships and collaboration, and doing that locally, but also at scale, given where we need to go in this decade and beyond. And then fifth, perhaps, is picking up on Tom's point about, and I know we've talked about this as well, Whitney, this idea of reimagining what value means, and perhaps that actually we need to name and recognize value in a much broader, deeper way that perhaps some of our current business models don't fully capture and achieve. And so that will be an interesting connection point for the finance industry, I guess, Gautier, in terms of how do we really reimagine financial tools and smart business models to really power up and unlock finance at larger scale behind true value in its full sense. With that, I will just quickly share Millie has, yeah, brilliant. So Millie has chat box all of the links for all of the different reports and sites that were mentioned today. So that's a really easy way for anyone on the call. Just copy the chat box and you have all of the links there. But this is essentially what we've captured in the chat box. So it captures the report, the Global Forest Assessment, more on waves of change, the mangrove breakthrough, high quality blue carbon principles, and 1T.org. You can share and sign up, of course, to our newsletter with more insights and opportunities for business on nature. And then if we go to the final slide, so if you'd like to use this QR code, you can join us on the 13th of December for episode 4, which is all around how to navigate nature impact and reporting to unlock real value. So hopefully you've got that QR code. It will also be in the follow-up notes. And if we bring everyone back on screen and slides down, I'd just like to say thank you so much to our panelists, Whitney from Salesforce, Tom from the Crowther Labs, Gautier from Mirova, and Megan from Iberostar. And thank you to all of you who've joined today live and to those who watched the replay. We really appreciate all your engagement, and we're excited for collective action by business behind nature. And I think with that, we can close off. I know we didn't get to every single question, some were quite specific, but hopefully we touched on quite a few and that you enjoyed today. And thank you again to panelists and everyone who joined us. Thanks, bye.